Okay, I'm so pleased to be here with Peggy Omara, who has a long career of working with parents and providing advice and support. And I'm so excited to talk to you because we were in contact 30 some years ago, which doesn't feel like that long, but it
No,
was.
it doesn't.
So I'm excited to talk about all the intervening time. So welcome.
Thank you so very much, Macall. I'm very thrilled
Good.
to be here. Thank you for
Great.
inviting me and exciting to, just have a conversation.
Yeah. So Mothering Magazine was everything back when my kids were just born. In fact, magazines were it. I keep trying to tell folks pre-internet, it was magazines mostly and books when you could sit down and read a book. So talk to me about like the early days of Mothering Magazine, which you came on in what, 1980?
1980, yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
First, I want to say we used to joke that because you're right, magazines were the only thing people had. And we would joke sometimes that people would get us a letter so soon for letter to the editor that they must have written it from the mailbox to their house. They must have just picked it up and read it and sent that letter right off. And we actually had a thing called Mothering Friends. We were like imagining the internet. We would
Oh,
send people lists of phone numbers. There weren't emails in those days, just phone numbers of people who could be a mothering friend in their area because everyone was looking for somebody that thought about parenting the way they did.
yeah. Yeah, it's hard to imagine life. I mean, we both were there, so we know what it was like, but
Yeah,
to compare it to today where you
yeah,
actually had to give people phone numbers.
yeah. Or calling cards. Who does that anymore?
Right.
Anyway, so mothering started in 1974 by a woman named Addie Evanson in Southern Colorado. And I actually saw the magazine in a food co-op in Albuquerque. And I had written an article called In Defense of Motherhood because when I had my first child, I felt ecstatic and no one had told me that.
Mm,
They just told me how terrible it was going to be. And I felt wonderful. And I
mm,
wanted to share that information and that inspiration. So I wrote an article and I sent it to New Age magazine, and Red Book magazine had a New Mother Stories. Both were rejected. Saw this magazine in this co-op in Albuquerque, Mothering Magazine. I thought, oh, I wish I had started that.
yeah.
And sent the article there. It was accepted. She also accepted a poem. I then, after that, moved to Albuquerque, started working with her. But then in 1980, I was able just to take the magazine over. There wasn't any down payment. There wasn't, you know, she wanted to get out from under it, do something different. Her dad had financed the magazine. It was kind of not kind of, it was in the red. I actually
Mm.
went to a bank with my kids who were playing in the ashtrays, as I asked
For
the
those of
bank
you who don't know,
person,
Ash,
"Can I borrow us some money to buy this magazine?" And they're like, "No." So, I just took it over and I didn't know what I was doing. I knew the material. I had been a La Leche League leader. I'd been involved in childbirth education. And I just wanted to help other parents like myself who were struggling, I would wake up in the middle of the night with my new baby and wonder how I'd ever get to them through the night. In the morning, what was I going to do? How would I handle this? No idea what I was doing, none of us don't. None of us do. So I just wanted to share that information with new parents and just kind of followed my instincts, published articles that I thought people I knew would want to know on issues that I was struggling with, which people would always say, "But to publish that article is just what I was thinking about." But we were all there, struggling with the same things. And so, yeah, that's kind of the
yeah.
beginnings.
That must have been a huge learning curve though, because it's one thing to say took over the magazine, but there's advertising and printing and contracts, and that must have been if you hadn't done it before, a big learning curve.
Was huge. And I was also superstitious. The woman who had started it, Addie Evanson, she had given me some magazines, Folio magazine. It was the magazine of magazine publishing. But I was like, I couldn't even look at those because I was overwhelmed with what I didn't know. But I was very well organized and I was a writer. I had already been a writer, aspired to be a writer. I learned to be an editor through the magazine by editing people's work and editing my own work then. But it was a huge learning curve. And there was, and that's kind of a parallel to parenting, isn't it? I mean, in a way, I was glad that I just kind of figured it out because I think I came up with good ideas rather than having this idea imposed on me that I didn't even know if I could perform to, in terms of what would be a magazine publishing would suggest. But it also was small then. We only had 3,000 readers. So I was able to do it one step at a time. And I learned one thing after another, learned to do layout, learned to do design, learned eventually to do marketing, which I thought, marketing,
Yeah.
okay, marketing, that's terrible,
Yeah.
but yeah, I figured it out as I went along.
Yeah. And those days too. I mean, I was thinking back when you said layout and I was like, oh yeah, those were the old days of
Yeah.
paste up,
Yeah.
right? We're not talking digital,
No, that one
emailing
happened
stuff
during the
back and
course of the
forth.
magazine. We went to, where you could just go design right to plate, right to printing. But even in the beginning, when I first learned layout, I would just like paste the photos right into the layout. I didn't even know
Yeah.
that you were supposed to do those separately and just leave a place for them. So
Sure,
I
sure.
made pretty much every mistake you can make, I'm sure.
Yeah. By the time I saw it, so my first child was 1994, so around that time. Mothering was full steam. I mean, it was a beautiful magazine. It was well respected. It really had done a lot. So, but I
That's
guess
part of my
that's, 10
strategy
years in.
too, that I thought if it looked good, I thought if
Yeah.
we put the lipstick, on this magazine, basically, I thought if we make this magazine look good, then people will respect the information more and they will think that this is the way it is.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I remember it having just a really, like, it was a great place to get an article in. It was a big deal.
And
So,
we would
yeah.
research it. We had footnotes with every article. We would fact check. We were very conscientious because I knew from my own experience as a mother because I had wanted to have a home birth. And I knew in looking into that I had an instinct toward that, but I wanted to support that with research. So that was the same thing I tried to do in the magazine to support the ideas that many of us had to find out, well, what's the research on that? What are other people
Yeah.
doing? What are other countries doing? What have other generations done? What are researchers doing? So we were very impeccable, I think, about supporting ideas with research, especially when they were new ideas or being questioned in the culture.
For sure. For sure. Yeah. Because a lot of times, you have to fight research with research,
Yeah,
essentially.
you do.
Yep.
And that's okay because social change takes time and it
Yeah.
should.
And so you were, you were on the magazine till what, 2011?
Yeah, 2011.
And one area that I love talking about is sort of how parents get their information. So with all the things that have changed in that amount of time in terms of how parents get their information and what information's out there. I'm curious what your observations are, kind of through time about the impact of how parents are getting their information.
Well, I think stepping back to the impact of mothering, I feel like we really changed the culture by bringing up ideas that were new and by legitimizing them. One of the things, an example of that is baby carrying. We had a dad on the cover carrying a baby in a baby carrier. And, and then we would see dads walking down the street when we go to conferences and be like, oh, I think we started that. But now I'm a little confused because there's so much information out there. I personally don't know. I mean, I know when I'm looking at the news, I there's Ad Fontes Media has a media bias chart that I can look at and determine the bias of the media that I'm looking at. But with parenting and mothering, it's very difficult to know if that website shares my point of view about parenting and mothering, unless I already know it. Like I know Attachment Parenting International, which is now Nurturing, is going to have a point of view that I'm going to be comfortable with. But I think almost that there's so many voices that it's kind of, the point of view is diluted, that it's, and people are afraid to have a strong point of view. We ran into that in mothering because most publications are dependent on advertising. Even online, they're dependent on advertising. We lost advertisers when we wrote about soy, when we wrote about circumcision. I see that in the news so much is that everything's just kind of on the middle, because people won't take a chance because they're going to make somebody mad or get the cancel culture. I made it clear that I had to sell Mothering in 2011 because of the economic downturn, because of the um, Great Recession. So I had to sell the website to pay off the debt of the magazine, the print debt that just developed, because that all happened so quickly. We lost advertisers and subscribers more quickly than we could keep up with that. And now Mothering is still a website, but when I look at it, it doesn't have the heart and soul that it had before, and doesn't have the strong point of view. It does still have a community, but somewhat obsolete with all the social media.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that answers your
Yeah.
question. Do you have ones that where do you do
No,
you
it's
feel the
just
same way?
more that when, again, when you and I were talking about the dark ages, pre-internet, the sources of information were smaller. Same with news, right? There was only X, Y, and Z places to get your information. And now it's everywhere in, easily accessible, easily Googled, easily searched. And
But
I feel like,
not with broad ranges of sources. Like what we were
no.
considered ourselves a niche magazine, right? So we were a niche magazine. How do you find that today? If I search, I find, just the top sites.
Right.
If I search, how am I going to find ones that are telling me, more, you know, minority opinions, I guess. I think it's hard. I think it's hard to find it because there's a lot of sources, but in the midst of them, you're not getting certain. You can't find all of them in your search, and you can't tell the point of view of them.
Yeah. I also see a lot of parents getting their information on, believe it or not, on TikTok.
Well,
So
my
there's
daughter likes
also,
TikTok. She's not a mom,
yeah,
but she likes TikTok, and
yeah.
yeah, for sure, on
But for
social media.
parenting information, right? So,
Yeah.
again, you go to Mothering Magazine or, whatever other magazines we had, and you'd read an article. You'd read the whole article, and you'd read it. It would be by an author, like you said, who you could see what their background was. You could see you knew what the magazine's point of view was. And now stuff is just, it seems like in dribs and drabs, right? Like
Well,
just,
but maybe that's the point, is that people aren't reading deeply, right? They're getting kind of sound bites, and
right.
with everyone's so busy and with so much information. I think it may be that people get more superficial information, but it's also good that there's lots of information out there that you can search and you can find things. That's certainly different than it was in our day. I do
Yeah,
appreciate that.
definitely. I mean, I'm glad the internet wasn't a thing because I think it would have made me, I just would have been one of those moms who's like, let me Google it.
Might have made you also compare yourself to others more, which
Right.
is a real challenge with parenting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Trying to be some imaginary parent you think you're supposed to be.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Well, and I do think that, like what Mothering did as well, even back then, was make people feel like I'm not alone in what I'm
Exactly.
thinking and wondering
Exactly.
about.
That's the main thing it did.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially, well, like you said, when it's not quite, it's a little, or it's not what everybody else is saying, right? You're like, no, I'm here. And Mothering really was that little safe space.
Yeah. Yeah. We talked about home birth. We talked about breastfeeding, extended breastfeeding, midwives, sleeping with your baby, all kinds of things that, weren't in the popular culture at the time.
Mm-hmm. And did those topics, would you say that they stayed fairly consistent over time, or did you feel like things, shifted over the years that you were there?
I think they stayed very consistent, but I think there were always new issues that came up. But there were classic issues from the beginning days of vaccines was a big question because it was Natural Family Living magazine. It was started by people who had gone back to the land after the Vietnam War, who wanted to live a natural life. So people were naturally asking, well, what about circumcision? What about vaccines in the light of natural living? How does that work? These were legitimate questions. Now they've been marginalized, but they were legitimate questions that they could ask. And that was the very first issue that I saw, even before I bought the magazine. People were asking that question. They were asking it, 30 years later. So there were some classic questions that people asked. And I did a lot of workshops with parents, and they would always have the same, a lot of the same questions about,
Yeah.
uh, yeah,
Well, right. I mean, the people change, but the questions definitely stay the same because you always are getting new crops,
and the
new
babies are,
batches of
the
people.
babies
The
have the
babies,
same needs. So they bring up the same
babies,
issues in our culture, right? Like,
the
why don't
babies.
I sleep through the night? Why can't I have any time to myself? When will I ever have any time to myself? Will my life ever be
Yeah.
the same again?
Yes.
And
Yes.
then looking back now, I think that was the happiest time of my life, even though it was so hard, but it was also so intimate that I felt
Mm-hmm.
most alive during that time. Uh,
Hmm.
but it was hard, but and
Yeah.
I grew so much. I grew from learning from my children. I always wanted to follow their lead. I wanted to see what does my baby need, and I wanted to follow my baby's lead. And I learned to be, a mother by breastfeeding and by following my baby's lead in breastfeeding, I think, and then understanding my baby's needs more by following, his or her lead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And a lot of that hasn't changed. I think there's a lot more worry about risk. Do you
Yeah,
see? Have you seen that a lot?
everything. Worry about everything. Yeah, a lot more
Yeah. Which.
anxiety for parents in general, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you feel like that? I mean, parents are anxious, baseline for sure. But do you feel like that's something that have you seen that kind of, do you feel like it's worse now?
Yeah, when I observe my kids and their parenting, I feel that they're more anxious about food. They're more anxious about letting their kids go out and about, that they'll be kidnapped by strangers. They're much more hovering of them because of the fear, I think, in the culture, the things that they read and hear about. Um, there's a book called Free Range Kids that this gal has written a while ago, but it's that kind of idea, that when my kids were growing up, they would go out and about and go to the pond, and they would climb trees and they would play. We lived out in the country, so they would go out by themselves. And I find my grandkids' experiences of going off by themselves to be very limited. And yeah, so I think they are, more anxious. And I think, I don't know what the food thing is. It just seems like they're just worried, like we would just make dinner and you would eat the dinner, they seem to be like, oh, do you want this special thing? Or you could have that special kind of thing. And, I that just seems crazy making to me.
Well, I think in some sense, a lot of information today is always couched in this. There's sort of an unspoken piece of it that says, if you don't do this, you can wreck your child, or really bad things will happen, rather than, hey, if this doesn't work out for you, you can try this other thing, right? Everything seems so fraught
But isn't
with,
that the way it's always been with parenting? Isn't that what you always worry about? Like, I'm not being a good enough mother if my child doesn't do X, if my child doesn't sleep through the night, I must be at fault. Something's wrong with me. So I think that kind of always comes with parenting.
yeah,
But I do think that there's more drama right now, more like less ability to just be, just let things be what in your life, because you look out there in the world, often at the news, you can feel anxious. But if you fall back into your own life and just look around your living room and
yeah,
your family, you're usually
mm-hmm,
doing pretty good. Things are
yeah,
usually okay. And
yeah,
even if you're struggling with problems, it's in the context of things, more things that are positive in your life than negative, I think.
right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And it goes back to that, what you said about that comparison thing. If you're struggling in your own day and you look on Instagram and you see these moms who seem to have it all together, we know that that causes parents to become more anxious and
Yeah.
depressed.
So maybe
So,
that's it. So maybe the social media where we see people presenting themselves in their most ideal way and compare that, back in my day, it was like, oh, look at those advertisements in the magazines that woman is airbrushed and her body really isn't like that. And it was great to
right.
learn that, because then you could realize, oh, that's not, that's maybe not how real people look. But I think we see a
Right.
lot of that now, and a lot of that false imagery of
Yeah.
perfection that
Yeah.
we even unconsciously think we have to live up to that in some way. And I think, yeah, it's social. Social
Yeah, that's
media
an
is a
interesting
huge
point.
factor. Yeah,
An interesting point about ads. For us, it was ads, right? Which you knew it was an advertisement at
yeah.
least. I always used to say my life wasn't the Pampers ad, or I expected it to be the Pampers ad, and it was not,
With the
right?
mom and the beautiful mom in the rocking chair.
Yeah,
So happy. Exactly.
yeah. So that's so interesting. Well, you talk about of course, intuitive parenting, and that goes along with this idea of where is intuition in this world of information. Like,
Yeah, good point.
I'm curious about that.
About where's intuition in this world?
Yeah, what in terms of like where has it eroded because we can't trust ourselves? Or do you feel like moms are still, or parents are still trying to tune in to themselves?
I think parents are always trying to be perfect, and do the best thing because, as you said, they don't want to mess up. They don't want to hurt their child in some way. Um, but I think falling back on your intuition is the only real way that you can access the information that you might have that might be unique to you and your child. I always like to say that your child is a one of a kind in all of creation, right? Your child is the only person born at that time of those parents in that moment. So our job as parents then is not to make that child like everybody else, but to witness and facilitate the unfolding of their own individuality. So in order to do that, it's just this moment with me and that child. And I have to listen to my heart. I have to see, I think it's not so hard if you follow the child's lead. I think that's where your intuition comes in because you don't
Hmm.
really know. But if you follow your child, what they need is what they want is what they need in those first few years. And their needs are legitimate. They're part of their biological imperative. It's what they need to become a full human being. So by following and observing those needs and trusting your child, I think you learn to trust yourself more. And as you learn to trust yourself more, I think your tuition becomes more available to you. Are
Mm,
there
that's a
techniques you
good
can
point.
use? I think it's reflection. I think what's hard as a new parent is how do you have time for reflection
Mm,
when you're so busy and you're so, you don't have time for a moment. So I think maybe when you're, nursing the baby is a good time to reflect. Um, yeah. So I don't know exactly how you find that, but I think that you find it I do think it comes from coming back to yourself, trusting yourself and considering yourself the expert in your own life. Like, it's important that you seek experts outside of yourself when you have exhausted your capabilities or your competence. That you're the only one that knows your child, and you're the only one that's going to know your child in 20 years. So if you go to somebody and they say blah, 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 and you got to check that out, you got to make sure that works for you because they're not going to be here 20 years from now checking in going, how'd that work? You're the only one that's going to live with that.
I see this so frequently when parents will go to a pediatrician and say, I think something's wrong. And the pediatrician will inevitably, first of all, I love pediatricians. I do.
Yeah. Oh, no,
But
me too. They've saved
so
my,
many,
saved my child's life. Yeah.
um, but a lot of them will say, oh, he's just has colic, or no, he's fine. He'll grow out of it, or this is normal. And the parent's intuition is saying something else. Um, and I think it's hard to push back against that sometimes.
So that's interesting. I thought you would have said the opposite. So the pediatrician isn't creating the problem. The pediatrician isn't seeing something that the parent sees themselves,
Yeah.
and they
Yeah.
just dismiss it because they don't
They
have a lot
just
of time.
dismiss it.
Or yeah, okay,
Yeah. Well, or they don't have the training. It seems like we really lionize pediatricians, like they should know in-depth information about feeding and sleep and, all of that. And they
they don't.
don't.
No,
They don't. They
yeah,
can't.
just like in birth, they tend to learn more of the emergencies or the more pathologies, and the day to day parenting is, they
Yeah.
didn't learn that in school, medical
Right.
school.
So I think, supporting parents' intuition is also, where do you get that validation? Of course, you get it from your child when you do something that works. But
But
it's such,
you probably know Jay Gordon from Mothering
Mhm.
from your work in Chat from Parenting, but he always says he asks the parent what's wrong. ask the parent what they think, because they're going to know. So there you go.
Well, that's the other idea, is find a better
Yeah.
pediatrician.
Yeah.
One that'll listen to you. So if I don't know how, do you still kind of talk to parents? Do you still give any kind of do you work with parents at all still, or are you
Not
mostly
as
just
much now.
writing?
I do. I have
Yeah.
other interests now that I'm pursuing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about that. What
Oh, yeah.
happened? What happened post mothering? How did you pivot from that?
Man, that took a little bit of time. I'll tell you,
I
that was
bet.
a big loss and a big
I bet.
change. And so soon after, I continued. I did my own website, and I continued to publish articles and do talks and stay in that parenting space, as they say now. Um, but one of the things I used to write about a lot in the magazine was the fact that parents, that in the United States, we had no benefits for parents, and I would say no wonder parents are depressed, because, we don't get any benefits as parents. In other countries, they get, parent leave, they get, like, the baby gets, they get money for the baby up to their first year. They get time off from work if they're working. It's extensive. And United States is pretty much the only country, or rich country, that doesn't have any paid medical or paid maternity or paternity leave. So I used to write about that a lot and kind of bemoan that to parents and say, no wonder you're depressed. So after a few years after mothering, I came in contact with a group that was advocating for what's called a care income. And first we advocated in 2019, going up to the 2020 election, for the child tax credit, because an expanded child tax credit that's refundable, which means it goes to everybody regardless of whether they owe taxes or not, can be a real help to people, especially families living in poverty. So from that, I got involved with the whole advocacy for a care income. And now I'm working with an organization, the Global Women's Strike and Care Income Now, to advocate for that. And specifically, I'm helping to organize a guaranteed care income in San Francisco for single mothers who are low income and at risk of, just at risk because they're vulnerable and low income mothers. So I've got involved in the guaranteed income movement, and particularly because that particularly addresses poverty for families and is a means to address poverty. And the whole idea of care income is really kind of radical, because we do this work, we take care of our children, our young children especially. We take care of our disabled children, our disabled relatives. We take care of our elders. And this work is mainly done by women. And we do it because we love these people. So people will say, well, why should I get paid for this? Because I do it out of love. But the fact that you do it out of love and don't get paid, nobody else would do it and not get paid if they weren't doing it out of love. So this work has monetary value. It has economic value. It's been valued at like billions of dollars, the work that women and girls do all over the world, caring for others. And that is really the underbelly of our economy. You can't have an economy where people go out into the economy and work if somebody doesn't take care of things, take care of food, take care of clothing, take care of the home. Those things are valuable. And caring for others is really a right that we have, to care for others and to be cared for by others. Most people, older people, want to be cared for by their loved ones, either in their home or in the home of their loved one. So I'm kind of seeing that now as a way to advocate for families by getting money into the hands of mothers, really, who are doing this work already and often in poverty. Because if you're taking care of a child or an elder, you don't have time to have a full-time job. You're going to be compromising your ability to make money otherwise. When you're already working, I mean, this is really work. And if somebody else were doing it, they'd be paid for it. So, yeah, so that's my latest jam is
Yeah,
work,
that's
compensating
amazing.
for work.
I also think there's like downstream effects too from not compensating caregiving, which is that even folks who are paid to do those jobs are paid so poorly.
That's right. It's
Because
the
it's just not,
both
it's
things.
just
And
value. It's not
we should
value.
lift up all the caregivers, those who are currently paid almost nothing to do really hard work, and those who are paid nothing at all. And we talk about this crisis, this caregiving crisis in the United States. But we talk about it in terms of creating an industry. Let's create an industry. But we're not the industry that we have now. Nobody's getting paid a living wage. So we need to think bigger than that and think about really compensating people a living wage and, compensating people in the home who are doing, work, taking care of their families. But the underpinning of all that is that we don't, most people don't make a living wage with
Yeah.
inflation and just the
Right.
sort of, it's out of sync, the money that companies are making and and they're, you see that, salaries are on the increase, but really not substantially. And I think a lot of people are suffering because my daughter's an example. She's a single mom. She has a full-time job, but she has to have a second job, to make ends meet and even to afford a place to rent. And there's
Yeah.
nothing, and she's working all the time.
Yeah.
Like something like 75% of the people in the United States who are receiving benefits like Medicaid and SNAP,
Yeah.
food stamps, are working full-time also.
Yeah.
So we're like supplementing the companies not paying people enough. The government is by giving people benefits because they can't make ends meet.
Yeah. The attorney general came out with that,
Yeah, he's a
thing
good guy.
about
He said
parental
some,
stress. And
yeah,
I'm so happy they did, but it was a great big duh, right? Because parents are, parents are so, the external stressors are so big combined with the actual stressors of having small children. And God forbid you have a kid with a special need or a tricky temperament, and it's
that's
a
right.
recipe for burnout, which we know is really,
And a recipe for
terrible.
poverty because if you have to spend all your time, and you do, a lot of kids with autism, I mean, it's a full-time job taking care of your kids.
Yeah. So you've kind of gone to the even bigger plane of working
Yeah, I like
on
where I've ended up. Yeah, it's kind of a
X.
surprise, and it kind of
Huh.
went through a lot of circuitous routes, but yeah, I think we just, let's get some money in the hands of mothers, cash for care. And that then makes a huge difference. When there was the expanded child tax credit 2021 as part of the American Rescue Plan. I think child poverty was reduced by 40% because of that. Just $350 a month. When my daughter got it, just a little bit of money, just a little extra money, to have that
Yeah.
little bit of
Yeah.
just in case. Most people don't
Well,
have even $400
yeah.
for an
Well,
emergency.
there, and that old trope is still around,
Oh
which
yeah.
is, oh, if you give people money, they just won't want to work for it, which is, I wish we could do, I don't know, have
No,
a
I wrote an
campaign
article.
about that.
I have my articles now on Medium, and I wrote an
Yeah.
article about, refuting that because there is no evidence. You look at the labor statistics of who's working now, everyone is working who can. Again, the only people that aren't working are going to school or they're retired or they're disabled or, they're caring for others. And not even those who are caring for others, they're still working. Most of the people who are, caring for others are still having a job, but you know, they they're overwhelmed, stressed, as you said, and, not making really enough money to make ends meet.
Yeah. So I'm sure that in that work, in your work, that there's probably some pretty big attitudinal barriers that you confront with that, would you say?
Good.
Or do you feel
And what kind of
well,
barriers?
that, people are like, why should we give people money to just stay home with their kids or whatever?
Yeah.
Like
Well,
those,
how I would give people money and is because what we do is instead we spend a whole lot of money to mop up the messes that are caused, right? So any money, I don't have the stat in front of me right now, but any money that we give to help people out of poverty comes back like 7 times in in benefits to the culture. Like if people are raised out of poverty, they get more education, they work more, they have better self-esteem, they need less, psychological counseling, whatever. They don't, they're not likely to hit their kids because they're so stressed. So everyone's going to be better off and healthier. So there's a lot of arguments but that's the argument. That's the old welfare queen argument. Like, oh, someone's
mm-hmm.
just on their couch eating bonbons. Well, that's never been true. That's just that's the prejudice. That's the bias towards the poor that a lot of people have. The bias towards the poor we have must be their fault. They must have done something wrong. There must be something wrong with them that they ended up in this situation. But if you track it again, when I use my daughter as an example, there is nothing she has done wrong. that girl is such a hard worker. She was in a difficult situation as a single mom, right? But as a single mom, she's just done heroically. And yet has been in poverty the whole time she's been a single mom. And not like bad poverty. She's
Yeah.
okay, but always on the edge, always worrying, always,
Yeah.
could use some more. Poverty is not someone's fault. It's not a character flaw. And it's largely the result of a culture, our cultural ethos that doesn't believe in taking care of people, doesn't believe that that's society's job is to take care of people, and doesn't understand that by taking care of people, we have a healthier society. So yeah, I'm really trying to work on that prejudice and that bias.
Yeah. Just a small little project.
A small little project, changing the world again.
Yeah, change the world again. So these days, if you were in front of a group of parents, new parents, let's say, what's your go-to advice?
I think I've already said it. It's really that you are your own expert. Trust yourself, fall back on yourself and your own experience, look at your own life and look at that rather than comparing yourself to others and others' life. Trust your child, trust your child's experience, trust that your child will show you the way, that their needs are legitimate, and that by following their needs, you will learn to be a better parent. Don't try to impose on your child some idea of the way things should be, because that changes. That's changed in the time that you and I have parented. I mean, it's always changing depending on the culture. And yet our childs come from, hunter. I mean, they're no different than they were when they were hunter gatherers. They're still biologically the same with the same needs. So finding that sort of kernel of truth in your child and in their experience, and then reflecting that in your own experience, is what I encourage people mainly to do, because I think nobody tells them that. Everyone tells them, read this book or get better or be
Hmm.
better. We have such an aspirational culture now. You have to be better, always be being better. That's my new movement, is like, let's just be not better. Let's just be. How about just be?
Yeah.
It's much harder
Yeah.
to be. It's much harder to be just who you are than to be more than who you are. Like, we all try to be more than who we are, but it's really
Yeah.
harder to just find out who the heck you are, your own, and be that, and be and live in that. We're
Yeah.
always just, right? Aren't we imposing on ourselves always the next thing, the next best thing we should be? And, I find that
Well,
as an older
yeah.
person, like, oh, I should do more, and
Well, yeah, it never ends, does it? Never ends.
never ends.
I think the push for independence and self-reliance, those big cultural values is still so much in the parenting world,
But where does that come from? Independence grows out of dependence. A child has to
right?
be dependent first, and the most dependent child will be your most independent child. So that independence grows out of that dependency. To try to
Yeah.
force that on a child is just to make them neurotic,
Yeah.
because you can't, you know yourself, your own self. When you try to change a habit or do something, it takes some time. You have to
Yeah.
contemplate the change. You have to integrate it. You have to make the change. Um, so yeah, I just think
Well,
that
you have to be capable of the change as well. I mean, I work a lot with parents of very brand new babies, and what I notice is first how many of them have never had experience with a baby of any kind before.
um,
And because in our day we all used to babysit. We had younger siblings, like babies
yeah,
were in
that's
our
true. Yeah.
world. Um, and the other one is how intense they are about with their worry and efforts to get that brand new baby in their own space. I can't put this baby down. Well, your baby's 10 days old. Of course you can't put them down, right?
And that's the baby's need, the baby is um, regulated by the presence of the mother. The baby's respiration is regulated by the mother's respiration. I'm sure you know the research of uh, James McKenna at Notre Dame and his mother and child lab, in which he hooked up electrodes to moms and babies when they slept together, and he found that the moms regulated the mom's respiration, regulated the baby's respiration. And the baby wakes up because the baby's like going through all this brain activity and all these changes, and they're learning to move, and they're sometimes crawling in their sleep, and they're also having, their teeth are coming in for the first couple of years. So I found with my own kids that they all woke up during the night regularly for the first couple of years, and then, then they settled in. But trying to impose that on a baby historically throughout history and in all other cultures, it's unusual for families to be in all these separate rooms from each other. They're usually all in the same room or often in the same bed.
Mm-hmm.
And we did an article in Mothering Magazine in 2002. We did a whole special on sleep. And we featured one article by a woman who looked at the Consumer Product Safety Commission research and found that, it was actually safer to sleep with your baby because of these coping mechanisms that were encouraged and that the baby needed. But like you're saying, if parents don't know that and they think it's their job to control their baby and to make this happen and they're busy and they're don't want to be inconvenienced or don't want to go to work all tired. So the societal pressures make you want to change the baby, but the baby's needs are the same. And if you can surrender to those and observe those and meet those needs, you're going to have a happier baby and a healthier human being when that baby grows up. Because it's in the attachment period that we learn. I mean, these first 3 years of life is when we learn how to trust. We learn empathy. We learn conscience, optimism. So that's the crisis of the first 2 years of life is trust or distrust. Can I trust the environment? Will it provide what I want?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And how do you handle that? How do you listen to them and help them, but also encourage them to listen to the baby? Can you do that in your situation?
Well, the interesting thing is that when I tell parents it's okay to hold them, it is okay to rock them, it is okay. If your baby's so new and I give them all that information, I literally can see anxiety and worry lifting off of them because what I feel like is they know that that's a good thing to do. It's the culture or the society that's told them it's not okay. And when you give them the permission, they know it. I have parents who feel guilty for holding their brand new baby to sleep. They feel guilty because society says, parenting culture says, you're supposed to lay that baby down and do drowsy but awake and eat, play, sleep, and a lot of these strategies.
All these things. See, I'm unaware of some of those new things in the culture that are.
That you're supposed to start practically from birth with some skills, and when
training.
You tell, kinda-ish,
but training of some kind.
Yeah, and when you tell parents you don't have to do that, they really, I see them experiencing relief and validation because what they want to do is hold their baby. What they want to do is nurse their baby to sleep.
That's my whole thing about trusting yourself. Yeah, because then you find those things and you know those things. And same thing about when I used to, I started out as a LHC leader and we would always talk about, always about how to get your baby to sleep and why isn't my baby sleeping. And then, but we all thought that, but nobody would admit that their baby didn't sleep through the night, right? Because that would make them a bad mother.
Yeah.
So then I once asked a group at a LHC meeting, raise your hands, how many babies they're still waking at night. And it was like everybody, like 75, 80% of the room. So that's another thing, like what you tell new parents, that makes parents realize, oh, I'm not doing this. This isn't what babies do.
Right.
That's why I always talk this thing about the first 2 years and what it looks like and kind of describe this process of what babies are going through and the growth that they're going through, to help them understand the physiology of what the baby's and the developmental thing, what the baby's going through. But we don't talk about that. There's this dominance, right? We're going to dominate everybody and dominate the babies, even though their needs, our actual needs, are what we need. We could go without a little sleep and still be fine.
Yeah.
At the time I thought, oh my God, I'll never get through this. But now I think it wasn't that long. That wasn't a big deal. What a baby I was. Complaining all the time.
Yeah. Well, I was a zombie, so I can't say that.
Well, no, I was a little, but yeah, no, I mean, seriously, I just stopped. I threw the clock out. I would wake up. I would look every time I woke up. I'd look at the clock and be like, "All right, I got this
Yeah,
much
yeah.
sleep. Okay, I went back to sleep then, and then I got
Right.
then, and then I got. I
Yeah.
didn't have hours sleep, or I didn't get enough, and I
Yeah.
just stopped doing that. I stopped
Yeah.
I stopped counting how many hours I got, and stopped looking at the clock. It changed my life. Not
Yeah.
that I'm saying like you aren't tired, but
Yeah. Yeah.
you
Yeah.
just figure it out. You deal with it.
Yeah, and I love the idea too that when what you're saying about essentially you're saying you have time. You have time. This whole first couple of years is about, getting your feet under you and learning about your kid. And I do think parenting advice culture now is you better start early. And if you don't start early, you're just going to be toast. And, there's this pressure that I see parents are under in addition to all the pressure that they have
Yeah.
just because of life.
And I wonder where they're getting their support. Where do they get their support from other parents? I think you
Yeah.
and I, we had La Leche League. We had, different kind of, again, people went to groups. They volunteered. They
They went
went
to
to
groups. Yeah.
hung out with other moms. And I don't, in our busy culture, I don't know where those opportunities are. I know that people will do that in childbirth education. They'll meet new parents there.
Yeah.
And they do meetups. My daughter said like they'll do meetups on Facebook and sometimes get together. But boy, that was my lifeline, is being able to talk to other moms and see where
Yeah.
they were down the road. So I could see a mom who had a 2-year-old who I thought, oh my, they're nursing their baby. What is wrong with them? They are crazy. And then of course, I was nursing my 2-year-old, but I got to go through that process of going, is that okay? And then,
Yeah.
yeah, it's fine, but
Yeah.
you get to learn by seeing other moms who are a little bit ahead of you. I had a friend
Yeah.
whose mom was a mom friend whose son was a little ahead of mine. And I remember saying to her one time, like, my arms are so tired from holding this baby. And she said, oh, your arms will get stronger. Isn't that great? Your arms will get
Yeah.
stronger.
Yeah.
And now they have all the carriers, where I finally figured that out. And we only had a few carriers back in the day, but
Yeah.
a baby carrier, you can get everything done, and the baby loves it. You love it.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
that solution.
There's several things that I'm like, wish we had that
Yeah,
in
me
the
too.
day,
Yeah,
way
for
back
sure.
in the old days.
In the old
Well,
days.
I just love the trajectory of your career. I mean, I know that pivoting away from mothering was like leaving a child. I'm sure
It
that
was
was
so
so
hard.
hard. I'm sure that was hard, but I love what you're doing now. And I looked at your Medium page and
Oh,
you
good.
write on
Thank you.
all kinds of
Yeah,
topics.
yeah, because they're
So,
all a lot of them interrelated. Thank you. Yeah,
yeah, of course. So I would invite folks listening to this to find Peggy on Medium because she's got lots of great thought-provoking topics
thank
on
you.
a wide range of things,
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, good.
current events. What else? Where else can they find you right now? Is that the best place,
Yeah, I
Medium,
think that's
or
the
on
best
your
place.
website?
Well, I did my website for a while, but it was sort of like we began the conversation. I couldn't really afford it without advertising, and I couldn't really get advertising because I didn't have that many readers. I mean, that many, that much traffic. I mean, some, but so it became just more, the technical stuff became more trouble. I just wanted to write. So I got, I could do the technical stuff, but I didn't want to spend my time on that. So I
Great,
decided to go to Medium, and I
great.
don't know. Medium's, you have to pay a certain amount a year to really look at a lot of articles. So I don't like that everything has a paywall, but I haven't
Mm-hmm.
found another place that's better.
Yeah, that's the way it
Yeah,
is now. That's the way it is. Well,
yeah.
this has
Thank you.
been incredible. Thank
Oh,
you
good.
so much.
Thank you.
So great to talk to you again.
Great. Lovely to talk
We'll
to you.
probably put Peggy's links to her Medium page and a few other things in the notes, I would imagine. But
Yeah,
thank you so much.
I'll see if there's any other links that I could send you that might be helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, to maybe some of the ventures that you're working on, those
Yeah.
campaigns. That would be
Yeah.
great.
Okay.
That'd be great.
Cool.
Okay.
Thank you, Macall.
Thanks,
This was great.
Peggy.
Appreciate it.
Okay.
Take care.
Bye. Hang on.